Well, hey everybody, welcome to Brave. How you guys doing? Woo! You guys dry? Okay, it's been pretty rainy this weekend. I felt like the roof was gonna fly off my house last night. It was so crazy. But man, it's great to have everybody here today. If you're a guest with us, if it's your first time, welcome. We're so glad you're here. My name is Samuel Laws. I have the honor of serving as our lead pastor. And hey, as we get started, I just want to welcome everyone joining us from all of our campuses. So if you're in San Ramon, San Francisco, Dublin, online, let's just give a hand for everybody that made it to church this weekend. I mean, hey, I get it. I have to be here every weekend. There might be some weekends where I'm like, let's just watch online and hang out. And I know that happens, okay? I know you guys do that. But I'm always more happy when you're here. It's awesome to have you guys with us. So today we're continuing a series that we've been in for, the last 4 weeks now. And so this is our 5th week called Organic Disciples. Quick show of hands if you've been with us for one of the parts of this series. Okay, awesome, a lot of you. So if you're just catching up, the premise is we want to be more like Jesus. That's what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, is to spend your life trying to be more like him. And so that's how we want to grow. And so what we've been looking at is 7 pillars that represent 7 areas of Jesus's life that were really important, that when we grow in, we become more like Jesus. And so today we're going to talk about an aspect of Jesus's character that really caught people off guard. It really shocked them because it kind of challenged their entire view of what it meant to be in leadership, what it meant to be a ruler, what it meant to have a prominent place in any kingdom that they knew of. And that's humble service. Okay, Christians have become known for a lot of negative things that were perceived to be against, okay? Like if you ask people in culture that don't go to church, aren't a follower of Jesus, and you say, hey, what do you think about Christians? There tends to be a lot of things that people don't like about Christians, and yet they still like Jesus. Have you ever thought about that? Like there's a lot of people that don't have a problem with Jesus, but they're not so sure about the people who represent him. And so one of the things about humble service is it really breaks down those perceptions, because you start to live out the love that Jesus called us to show to other people, regardless of biases, preference, your beliefs and viewpoints. I mean, Christians have become known for being against people of other religions, against minority groups, against people who vote a certain way, against people who identify with the LGBTQ plus community. I mean, the list could go on of the things that Christians have become known for being against, depending on who you talk to. However, the core Christian virtue is love. It's a love for all people, love that isn't earned or deserved, love that nothing you or I could do to be worthy of. And so when you see people as people to be loved, you see people the way Jesus does. And so humble service becomes a natural response to that view, to that love for people. And so this is the kind of love that Jesus embodied. And when we grow in this area, it impacts our entire lives. Recently, I was on a date with my wife, Marcy, and a friend of mine had told me about some questions that him and his wife ask every now and then on date nights, and it just kind of helps strengthen their relationship. And so I thought, well, I'm going to try this. I'm going to ask a question. But then I was like, I don't really want to. This kind of feels like work. And then part of me also didn't want to ask because I was like, I might not like the answer. I don't know if I want to go there. But then I was like thinking about it. And have you ever been kind of like you're trying to work yourself up to just do something? Okay, I was in that situation. I was just like, gosh, I just want to say it, but we're halfway through the dinner. And so finally it was like I just heard the words coming out of my mouth. As I said them, I said, hey, babe, what would make me a better husband? She goes, well, where do I start? I'm like, one thing, okay? We're just gonna do one. This is a constructive experiment, okay? So she shared just a very specific thing. She was like, hey, you could be, more aware of my feelings or more empathetic at these times. And I said, you know what? I can work on that because I want to serve her better. Right? That's humble service. And here's the thing that happens, right? When we serve people, it helps them, but it changes us. Like when you serve people, it helps them, but it changes us. Whether it's in any relationship, a marriage, a friendship, when you have a heart to serve, you do things that in your nature you wouldn't necessarily want to do or even think to do. And then it starts to change who you are and you become more like Jesus. And so there are things that God wants to develop in our lives that will not happen until we start serving people as he does. And so today, that's what we're going to talk about. How does serving change us? What does it do in here to make us more like Jesus? And the first thing is this. Number one, serving develops humility. It develops humility. 1 John 3:18 says, "Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with action and in truth." Serving others can never be theoretical, right? It's not just this thing we talk about or this idea that we have or these words that we say. Jesus is like, hey, don't just use words. Don't just make speeches. Don't just talk about your love. Real love requires consistent, faithful action rooted in truth. There's this show that my wife watches sometimes called Love is Blind. Have you guys heard of this show? It's on Netflix. And I'm not recommending it, but I'm just saying she was watching it with some friends. We were on vacation and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to like give it a go. I'm just going to like watch a few episodes with them. Now, actually what happened is I was sitting at the table reading and I was feeling left out. So I was like, you know what, they're like laughing a lot. It sounds like they're having a good time. I'm just going to join them for a little bit, okay? But the premise of this show, Love is Blind, is that people could fall in love with someone that they've never seen and then get married. So they're like in these dating pods and it's like speed dating and they're talking to people, but it's behind a wall. So they don't see what they look like. And then eventually they narrow it down and they choose someone. They're like, I could see myself marrying you. And then there's like this dramatic reveal moment where they see what the other person looks like. And then, interesting responses from there, honestly. But they go on this like trip and it's kind of like a honeymoon and then they come back. And what was really interesting is when they got back from the trip, the facade is gone and most of the relationships just failed immediately because it's real life. And in real life, love requires commitment. It requires compromise. It requires sacrifice. It requires all these things that a dating bubble and a honeymoon do not. Okay, so the moral of the story, and by the way, the thing that they end up talking about the most once they finally meet is what everybody looks like. So the moral of the story in this show is that love is not blind. But follow me on this, okay? And I'm not suggesting this for your dating or romantic kind of love, but when I say this, but what if our willingness to love other people was blind? What if our love was blind and that we were willing to humbly serve people regardless of what they look like, regardless of what they believe, regardless of our biases and our preferences? What if we were willing to serve anybody? What if we were willing to love anybody? Humble service is love in action, and that's exactly what Jesus did. Jesus said that people will know you by your love for one, will know that you are my disciples by your love for one another. And so here's the really cool thing. The more you serve people, even if you don't feel like it at first, it leads to really good things in your life. Has anybody ever been tricked into serving? Okay, you didn't know what you signed up for? Okay, I was talking to somebody the other day and he was telling me this story about how he signed up to be a chaperone for a middle school summer camp. And he just thought I'd drive him up there. I'm going to be working remote for the week. I've got my computer. Then he gets there and it's all in. Like you're not even allowed to make phone calls. Like you're 24/7. Like you have to make sure that these kids do what they're supposed to do. You've got to be engaged in every activity. And he's like, it's totally not what I was expecting, but it ended up being one of the best weeks ever because it put him into a mode of serving completely a bunch of middle schoolers. Some of you are like, that would never happen to me. But serving blesses the recipient as much as it blesses the servant. Even if at first you don't feel like it or you just know it's the right thing to do, but you're not sure you want to, it always leads to good things in our lives. There's a whole group of people in our church every summer that serve sacrificially to put on Kids Blast a week that serves our families and hundreds of children come on our Dublin campus from all over. And it is one of the most life-changing weeks in these kids' lives. Kids find Jesus for the first time. They decide to follow Jesus. It's amazing, but that doesn't happen if there aren't a whole bunch of people that are willing to take off work to serve these kids. Like that's That's not just a volunteering of your time. That's a sacrifice. Like, you're missing work for this. And yet people do it every year, which is amazing. And so many, and if you talk to the people that do it, there will be hard days, because sometimes it's really hot in the summer. And how many of you know, like a bunch of little kids that are like really hot and like dehydrated, doesn't go so well all the time, okay? So there's some hard days. I'm not gonna make it sound like it's all amazing, but it's one of the most rewarding and fruitful weeks of the entire year. It's amazing what God does. So your feelings will catch up with your heart. Serving enlarges the hearts of people. The second way that serving changes us is this. Number 2, serving gives us significance. It gives us significance. Our world is craving significance. It is hungry for purpose. It is hungry for things to do that matter. And according to Jesus, serving is the way to find those things. Matthew 25, it says, "For I was hungry," this is Jesus talking. He says, "I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger and you invited me into your home. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you visited me." Then these righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will say, "I tell you the truth, when you did it for one of the least of these my brothers and sisters, you were doing it for me." See, in this passage, it's just before Jesus' death. He's about to celebrate Passover with the disciples. Palm Sunday has already happened. And much of Jesus' teaching in this section is about rebuking these religious leaders who were hypocritical. But then in Matthew 25, what Jesus is really trying to hammer home is that all acts of service, no matter how small, are significant. These acts of service, we don't do them for salvation. We're not trying to earn something or gain something. But these acts of service, what they do when we start humbly serving people, is they show that we have God's heart. They show that we recognize all that we've received from Christ, and it's a natural response that we then want to give back, that we want to represent that kind of love to the world around us. Jesus said this. He said, "I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me, and I was in prison, and you visited me." And what's interesting here, Jesus, he's talking about this kind of serving in a relational context. It's not like just, I saw someone on the side of the road and I helped them. That's not a bad thing to do. But what he's saying here is, no, you actually care beyond just solving the problem and the need, but you care about the person. You want a relationship with them. You want this act of love to be a bonding moment. He's speaking about what we do for others in the context of relationships. So it's not random acts of service. First, he talks about the stranger. Let's just walk through a few of these. The stranger. In first century Palestine, a stranger was completely dependent on the hospitality of the people in whatever town they went to. They didn't have hotels. Even if you had resources, you couldn't just provide your own housing. And so you'd be stuck out in the open air, not a very safe place to sleep, not a great environment to be in, if you didn't have the hospitality of a stranger that was willing to take you in. Then Jesus talks about the person with no clothes. He says, "I was naked and you gave me clothing." Okay, in our context, when we hear naked, the first thing we think of is not poverty. We think of something sexual, right? But here Jesus is saying, you were naked, I was naked, and you gave me clothes. In other words, you provided for me. You helped me when I had a need. Then Jesus said, "I was sick and you cared for me." Maybe there was nothing that could be done for the person. Like, it wasn't about this treatment or this surgery. They needed like a GoFundMe it wasn't about, it's like, no, I was sick and you cared enough to come visit me to show that you really care about me. You care about me. How many of you have ever been sick and someone visited you and that just made all the difference? It wasn't even that there was something you needed them to do for you, but you just knew when they came to visit you, it meant that, wow, they really cared. Hospitals aren't fun places to hang out, right? They're not great places to be unless you need to be there, right? And then lastly, Jesus says, "I was in prison and you visited me." Okay, first century prisons were very dark places. They weren't places to, keep society safe. They were places of punishment. Okay, they weren't places where there was any hope for your future beyond that, where there were programs for serving them and helping people grow beyond their circumstances. No, it was like, hey, if you're in prison, we don't even view you as a human being. And so for the audience that Jesus was talking to, for his disciples to hear this, their minds would have been blown. Like, why would we go visit anyone in prison? Most people avoided prisons like the plague. But you know what this did? All of these things that Jesus is saying, they cut through all of these cultural barriers and all of the judgments of the people that would have been listening, because Jesus' most basic summary of the entire law that they were being taught to live by was this: treat people as you would want to be treated. Treat people as you would want to be treated. I was talking to a friend the other day that was going through a difficult situation with another friend of his, and wasn't really, we were talking about what to say to the person, and it just kind of dropped into my mind. Well, if you were in his situation, what would you want someone to say to you? And isn't it amazing how just that simple question can provide so much wisdom and cut through so much of the noise and confusion, and really just gets you in the heart posture of how can I help? How can I help them see what they need to see or hear what they need to hear? Jesus' disciples, then they were confused that he references that he's this person. They're like, we didn't do that for you. We didn't help you in those ways. But what Jesus is saying is he's showing them how significant their serving is. Because when you serve other people, you're doing it as if you're serving me. You're serving Jesus. You're not just meeting needs. You're serving Jesus. When you open a door for someone, in the simplest things, when you buy someone coffee, when you sponsor a family that needs a scholarship for Kids Blast or Super Thursdays or whatever it might be, when you do that, you're serving Jesus. When someone at work maybe needs somebody to go get something or pick something up, and it's not convenient for you, but you do it, that's serving. When you're at the gym and you just wipe down your weights or re-rack your station, right? That is serving people. It's all significant. Every single act of serving matters. The well-known Christian author Eugene Peterson is known for the Message translation of the Bible and all the work he did on that. And he was asked one time, he's now passed away, he's now in heaven, but he was asked one time, if you were preaching your last message ever and you knew it was going to be your last, what would you say? And this is what he said. He said, I think I would talk about things that are immediate and ordinary. In the kind of world we live in, the primary way that we can get people to be aware of God is simple questions like, who are you having breakfast tomorrow? And how are you going to treat them? In other words, we think of people needing to hear all these, super spiritual things like talking about prayer and talking about worship and talking about all this other stuff. And those are important. But if we miss the simple fact that if this doesn't connect to how we're treating people, to who we're putting our time into and who we're pouring into, then we're missing the whole point. Then Peterson, he says this, he says, go home and be good to your spouse. Treat your children with respect. Do a good job at work. We need to be salt in the real world, and that involves being genuinely being with real people, listening to them well, treating them as the small images of God that they are. See, every day, you are living your life in a mission field. You don't need to go far away to be on a mission field. Every single day, your life as a follower of Jesus is lived on a mission field. Whether you're at work, whether you're at school, whether you're at the grocery store, a coffee shop, an event, wherever you might go. And so we need to pray for people. And we need to pray that God would give us eyes to see and ears to hear, as there's ways that we can serve the people around us. And that represents the love and heart of God. I mean, imagine if you started each day, wherever you're driving to or walking to at the start of your day, and you just say, God, who can I serve today? Show me an opportunity to be used by you. Ask God to show you. Did you know that even just doing a good job at your work is humble service? Just bringing your best is a form of humble service. It doesn't matter where you work. You don't have to work at a church or a nonprofit or some kind of ministry. No, when you do a good job at work, you're serving your boss well, who maybe doesn't know Jesus. When you do a good job at work, you're serving your coworkers, you're serving the organization. In some cases, you're serving customers. Okay, there might be rewards to doing a good job, but what if the root thing is, hey, I'm representing Jesus. like as an employee here surrounded by people that do or do not know God, my work represents Christ. People know that I'm a Christian. And so what kind of representation are we being with the effort we bring to our jobs? So let's review this. How does serving change us? Okay, first it develops humility. Second, it gives us significance. And lastly, and this is what we're going to spend the most time on, is that serving tests our motives. It's a test for our motives. Mark 10 says that Jesus called them together, and he said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Just before this passage, Jesus predicts his death on the cross. And he predicts it, and he tells them that this is going to be the greatest act of service for all of humanity. And right after this moment, James and John want to know about a promotion. They're like, hey, what kind of position are we going to get out of this? Where does this go for us? The disciples, they're still focused on their personal status. They wanted to be served eventually. They're like, hey, we'll put in our time with Jesus and we'll serve him. But then eventually people will start serving us. And Jesus replied to the disciples again in verse 45. He just points to the cross. He's like, guys, it's not what you think you're signing up for. It's not what you're expecting. You're signing up for a low position. And even as you rise up, it's not about getting more, it's about giving more. Jesus wanted his followers to be humble servants. He didn't want prestigious proteges that were seeking personal gain. And so humble service tests our motives. It purifies our hearts. In the kingdom of God, if you want to rise up, be a servant. Do you want to know one of the ways for me that I know if I'm growing in humility as a leader? It's a really great test. It's really simple. When someone treats me like a servant and I don't get upset. Like when someone actually treats me like, servant leader is really popular. There's a lot of books about it right now, okay? It's admired in culture to be a servant leader. But what about when people treat you like a servant? See, when a servant does their job, they don't get thanked because all they did was their job. A humble servant doesn't have to pretend to be humble. They just are humble. And when you're humble and someone doesn't respond to you in the way that you hoped, or you don't feel appreciated the way you thought you would be, your first reaction, my first reaction is often like, wow, that was not what I was expecting. But the difference between growing in humility and growing in pride is instead of that reaction escalating to an offense, you're reminded, wait a minute, I'm just the servant. And you move on. Okay? Humble servants are hard to offend because they have low expectations, because they're not serving for the response. They're not serving for the credit. They're not serving for the praise. They're serving because they represent Jesus and Jesus served us. They're serving for significance because it matters, right? They're serving because serving is an identity. It's who we are. We are humble servants, and so that's our goal. In this book, Leaders Eat Last, Simon Sinek tells this story of a former undersecretary of defense. And he gave a speech at a large conference, and he was a decorated official. He was honored. It was a big deal. He's on this big stage giving a speech. And so as he came to give this speech, just in his introduction, as he starts talking, he pauses and he looks down at this styrofoam cup of coffee that he's holding, and he smiles. And then he takes another sip, and then he kind of interrupts himself. He goes, I spoke here last year. And he presented at this same conference on the same stage, but a year before, while he was still the undersecretary. And he said, I flew here in business class. When I landed, somebody greeted me. They had a sign with my name on it. They took me in a car. They brought me to the hotel. When I got to the hotel, they had already checked me in. They brought me up to my room. Then the next morning, before I came to speak, there was somebody that was there to greet me and take me to the conference center. I was brought into a beautiful speaker room, and they gave me a ceramic mug that I drank my coffee out of. And he said, but this year was totally different. He said, this year I'm no longer the undersecretary. I flew here in coach. I arrived, and there was nobody to greet me. I took a taxi to the hotel. When I got to the hotel, I checked myself in. The next morning, there was nobody in the lobby to greet me, so I took a taxi to the venue. I went backstage. I couldn't find any coffee. I asked one of the production techs, hey, do we have any coffee around here? He pointed to a coffee machine with a bunch of styrofoam cups. He raised up the cup, and he showed the audience this styrofoam cup that he was now drinking out of, and he says, it occurred to me that the ceramic cup that they gave me last year was never for me. It was never meant for me at all. It was meant for the position I held. And I deserve the styrofoam cup. And the truth is, we all deserve the styrofoam cup. Okay? Sometimes we just don't realize it until we lose the ceramic one. Okay? In every season of life, we will experience changes in our roles. Changes to our responsibilities, changes to our relationships, whether it's in work, whether it's in family, whether it's in ministry. And these changes can be hard to adjust to. Roles and transitions are a great test. In every season of life as they happen, they're a great test of what's motivating us. Now, this isn't just in a career. It's an adjustment from being single to being married. That's a role change. From parenting kids to parenting kids who have become adults. There's a role change. From leading a serving team to now you're serving on that serving team. From maybe at work, you've had just a trajectory of career changes and gradual progression, and then now you find yourself in a succession plan, or you find yourself retired, and there's a role change. There are positives and there are privileges to our roles in every season. Every role has these different benefits in life and in relationships, but they aren't meant for us. They're meant for the position we hold in the time that God has positioned us there, whether it's in someone's life, whether it's in a ministry, whether it's a role at work. And so people who don't get this, they often struggle with transitions because they're trying to hold on to what was meant for a different season that's now meant for something else. So often our roles, they change throughout the course of our lives, but here's the deal. Only Jesus has an unalterable role. Only his role stays the same. And so the day will come when all of us will experience these transitions. Maybe some of you are in one now. And when that day comes and you've lost your ceramic cup, embrace the styrofoam one. Embrace it. In Philippians, Paul makes it clear the path to joyful partnership, it runs through surrender. He says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Humble servants are people that when they see a need, their first response isn't, well, why hasn't someone done something about that? Like, why hasn't my church figured that out? Or why hasn't so-and-so, No, their first response is, I can help. I can serve. I see an opportunity. I can meet that need. And not to prove to someone that they should have done it, right? Not to get credit, not to get praise, just to help. A few weeks ago, I met with a group of older women from our Dublin campus. Some of them have been at the church for many decades, from 30 years to 50 years. And I didn't know what their agenda was or what the agenda would be. We'd had a lot of different conversations. And I was surprised to find, really, at the end of the day, there was one consistent thing that they were after. One consistent priority. And it wasn't a list of desires or demands or things that they wanted. No, they came to me with one agenda, and that was to see how they could serve their church. Brave.Church. We need more people that's the agenda, that's the motive, right? They've been members for decades. If there's anybody that after like 40, 50 years at one church shouldn't need to go to a welcome class to learn what's going on, it's them, and they're willing to do that. Isn't that awesome? That's humility. As we close, I just want to challenge you during this season, and I want to share something we can celebrate as well. That is, this last Sunday, there were over 300 people worshiping with us than there were the same Sunday the year before across our campuses. Isn't that awesome? I think that's amazing. And it's not about how many people come on a Sunday. That's not the point to that. The point is that lives are being changed and impacted. And I also want you to know, if this is your church, if you're a part of this thing, if you call this your home church, we need you to serve. Because when you have all these new people, like, we don't put all the expectation on everybody who's new. We'd love to have you on the team. No, but it's up to us when we see God doing everything we've prayed and hoped he would do across the Bay Area in the lives of people. When we see God drawing people to himself, that's our moment to step up. That's our moment to see the gaps and go, I can help with that. Growth is exciting, but it creates greater needs. It creates greater opportunities. Right now, your faithfulness and your serving and your giving matters more than ever, because there's key staff roles that we need to add to our church. There's there's more kids than we've ever had in the kids ministry. And you can only have so many with certain ratios and stuff, right? We need your serving. And so here's 3 ways. I told you I was going to challenge you. I don't do this every Sunday. But here's 3 ways that you can respond. The first is just joining Team Brave. Serve regularly. The path to that is welcome to Brave. If you've already been to that, just ask somebody. Ask somebody with a badge on how you can get involved. We've got these lanyards on. Everybody who's on Team Brave, just ask them, hey, how can I join the team? How can I serve? The second opportunity would be to serve your community. In April, we don't just serve here. We don't just serve each other. We don't just serve within the church, but we serve the community. And in April, there's a serve day. We're partnering with the city of Dublin to just do a bunch of serve projects from San Ramon and Dublin, and everyone can be a part of it. It's going to be on the website to sign up. And then also, we're serving in San Francisco with SF City Impact. We're going to be in the Tenderloin serving the poor and serving those in need. And that'll also be on our website. You can find out more. All that's coming up soon. And then lastly, come to team night. So I had no idea when we mapped out this series and when we planned our team night, this was all like very far in advance, that I'd be talking about serving the same day that we have a team night, tonight at 5. Like, what are the odds? In the East Bay, we're going to be in San Ramon, and San Francisco will be at the San Francisco campus. And maybe you're on team night, you're on Team Brave, and you weren't going to come. No, come. We need you there. Okay, we're getting ready for Easter, you guys. It's going to be awesome. So many people are going to come to know Jesus for the first time during this Easter season. Maybe you're just exploring it. You haven't been to Welcome to Brave yet. You're not sure what you can commit to or what you want to do. You can still come. Okay, we've got dinner. We've got childcare. Just show up in San Francisco or San Ramon. I shared at the beginning that when we serve people, it helps them, but it changes us. And so I want to end with a prayer over you, over our church, that God would show us ways we can help people. If you bow your heads and join me, let's pray. Let's close in prayer. God, I pray right now that you would clear our minds, settle our hearts, remove any distractions that are keeping us from hearing from you in this moment. But God, I pray that you would show each one of us what our next step. It's personal. Everyone's at different places. You're leading us in different ways. But God, I pray that you would show us what is the one thing that you want me to do in response to this? What is the one thing that you ask of me? And God, I pray that you would give me the courage to obey. In Jesus' name, amen.